muna. Sus.
Joey, you're now 10 p.m. no?
Yes, it's almost 10 p.m.
Hi,
here.
Joey. How are you, Joey?
I'm
Nice
good.
to meet you. Kailan ka mabalik sa Pinas, Joey?
Pag may pamasahe na.
Ay,
Walang
naku.
pamasahe.
Medyo magulo dito ngayon eh.
Dito rin.
Oo nga eh.
Sa airport pala, magulo na.
Talaga. At
Yeah.
saka, hoy, ang balita ngayon, Supreme Court ng Amerika ha. Mukhang yung environmental program ng Amerika will be put on hold for a long time.
Oh, the Green New Deal.
Oo.
Oh, okay.
Dr. Nick, can we test your PowerPoint?
Teka, Arnold, sasara ko mo. Alam mo, naka-hearing aid na ako. Wala pa naman. Naka-hearing aid na ako. Pero ang aircon ko, papatayin ko muna dahil ang ingay-ingay ng
Sige po, sige po. In the meantime, Cliff, can we test your PowerPoint? Cliff.
Ayan.
Morning, everyone.
Hi,
good morning.
Alma. Nice to see you. You're a sight for sore eyes. Nako, mabuti naman.
Gosh, I'm still asleep. Actually, this is not me. This is not my waking hour.
Yeah. This is very early for Miss Alma.
Arnold?
Cliff, can we test your PowerPoint? Try.
There, I'm testing it now.
Hello?
Okay, it's working.
I'll try. Yung volume ko, lakas ako ng konti. There.
Dr. Dick, okay po yung nyo? Audio, video. Yun na lang
Okay
po.
naman, ha? So I come in loud and clear. Kayo rin, you come in loud and clear.
Opo.
I hope sa open forum, ganun din ang mangyayari. Kayo mga panelists at saka what do you call this, ang tawag dito, mga moderators, mapapakiusapan kung medyo linawan ng konti ang pagsasalita ninyo at lakas-lakasan para marinig ko mabuti. Anyway, so ang ating Arnold, ikaw bang administrador ng Zoom natin?
Si Joanna po.
Okay. Let me know kung meron technical problems. Let me know. Tulungan niyo lang ako dahil
Yeah, test po natin. Paki-share po yung screen nyo ngayon. Let's test your PowerPoint.
yung alin?
Paki-share po yung screen nyo. I-test po natin yung PowerPoint ninyo.
Okay. I will share my PowerPoint. There you are. How does that look?
Wala po kaming nakikita. Kayo po nakikita.
Oh, teka. Huh? Okay, share screen. Okay. There you go. I-click ko na lang itong PowerPoint ko. Ayun. Ito yung PowerPoint na nasa inyo, no?
Yes.
Okay, click ko yung PowerPoint na nasa akin. I made one last correction.
Sige po. Good morning, Babes. MAP President Babe Simpson is on board.
Good
morning, Mr. President.
Morning, Secretary Babe.
Morning, babes.
Hi. Good morning. Sorry.
Good morning, President Babes.
Morning, everyone.
Let me see.
Arnold, what about Rico?
Binubuksan ko yung PowerPoint ko. Ito na.
Beth, please remind me.
There you go. There. Kita na ninyo?
Wala pa rin po. Just in case po, Joanna will do it at our end. Just in case.
Oo, okay.
Nick, would you like Joanna to do it na lang? Para,
How's that?
would you want Joanna to do and manage your slide for you?
Na, ako na.
Slide deck?
Oo, ako na. Oo.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, can you try sharing?
There you go. Alam mo, kakapakapa pa ako sa Zoom eh. So I have to rejoin the meeting. So here I am. Hindi maiwasan mga disruptions mo.
Good morning, Attorney Rico.
Morning, Rico.
Sir, good morning everyone. Good morning.
Okay. Arnold, nakikita mo na yung PowerPoint ko?
Wala pa rin po.
Okay.
Rico, my President Babes is on board.
Hi, hello, President Babes. Good morning. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, President.
Morning.
Mr. President.
Morning, Attorney Rico. Good morning,
Yes,
Doctor.
sir. I saw you at Frank's affair. Mukhang marami kang tagahanga rin doon at busy ka rin.
Hi, Vic. Long time no see. Vic.
Yeah.
Arnold, what do I do now? Let's just now share. I will share my screen later before I make my PowerPoint presentation. Pero ini-share, tinetesting natin, but hindi. Okay, click share screen.
Then you have to click. You have to choose your slide. You will see different different apps open on your computer. You choose the slide, and then you have to click share again. You should see a blue button which says share.
Teka, I didn't quite get that. What I see here is share screen, which I usually do. Click share screen.
That's the green button below, right?
Yeah, I click it.
Then you choose the slide, and then you click share again. So there are two steps.
Oh, what's the first step again?
The green below.
Share. Click it. There. And then?
Then on the bottom, you will see another share blue button, share, bottom right.
Bottom up.
Wala kang nakita. You should see another blue.
Another
button.
green?
No, blue.
Blue. I see a microphone here in blue.
Maybe you click your screen there if you can see it showing where your PowerPoint is.
Well, my PowerPoint is there. Nasa activity bar ko.
Yeah, it will kasi show several windows that are open.
Yeah.
So you go to your window na may PowerPoint and then click that.
Ito. So, wala pa rin, ano?
Wala.
Oh my God.
I think best for Beth to do it for you. So you will use yun.
Oh, there it go.
Now we see it.
Na.
Now we see
We
it.
can see it na po.
Ito yung version na nasa inyo, ha? So, okay, that's fine. Wala namang major difference. Sige.
Okay,
So,
shall we do that?
Oh,
Beth na lang will share it.
pero so what you see now is my PowerPoint, not my image.
No, we can still see you on the sidebar, but the PowerPoint is showing.
Okay, but I want to be in control of my presentation.
Oh, you're the one doing it now, right?
No, I'm not.
Beth, ikaw ba?
Joanna, you're doing it now. Joanna.
Po,
Si
Joanna.
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 Okay, can we stop sharing para we can try? Si Dr. Nick can try again. It's 10 o'clock, so.
Okay, so I want to control my presentation, Arnold. So am I ready for that now?
Click share screen
Okay, share screen.
and then click your PowerPoint.
Doon sa activity bar or the one I see on ito? Yeah.
Kasi several, yan, there you go, there you go.
Okay, now.
And then you click the slideshow sa baba. That looks like a big screen sa baba. lower right-hand corner.
Lower right.
Doon sa nakikita mo yung parang parang icon ng parang screen, malaking screen. Sa baba mismo. Katabi nung ng
To
volume.
the right, to the right, to the right.
To the right. Lower right. Lower. Yes.
One more,
Yeah,
yeah.
that one. There, katabi lang. The icon in drawing ng screen.
Nasa
Go to the
left.
left again. Yeah, there
Yes,
you go.
that's the
That's it.
one.
What's
Yes.
okay,
You just
I
have
think
to
that-
you just have to click that so that it will show ng buo. There you go.
all right. Hindi ko alam yung detalyang yun. So how? Okay.
So,
Advance your screen.
Advance your screen now. Page.
Your
Yes,
PowerPoint.
that's good. You keep pressing until you get to where you
Okay.
want.
Okay. Am I on now?
Yes. We can see your screen.
Okay.
So you know what to do already. When you should-
Okay.
Okay.
I'll start
All
now.
right.
Good morning. Good morning.
No,
everyone.
Number two.
We
Okay.
will have they will start first. You stop sharing and then they will do the openings.
Oh, sige. Okay.
And then
No,
they will
okay.
call you. All right.
Okay, Vic, we can start. Thank you.
Yes. Oh.
Okay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us for the MAP CEO Academy panel discussion on a new age of capitalism in the Philippines, part 2. This is a project of the Management Association of the Philippines and with the joint committees of the MAP Human and Management Development Committee, the MAP ESG Committee under the MAP CEO Academy. The MAP CEO Academy, as you all know, serves as the umbrella brand for MAP activities that address the continuing education of MAP members and other management practitioners and the sharing of the latest technologies and information on management and leadership. My name is Vic Magdarao, and I am one of the moderators for today's panel discussion. My co-moderator is the ever-popular Dr. Ben T. Hanke. So please settle down comfortably.
Hi, Ben.
We will now begin our program. To deliver his welcome remarks, may I now call on the overall chair of the MAP Human and Management Development Committee. Please welcome Attorney Rico de Guzman. Rico, please.
Good morning, everyone. Our esteemed MAP President, Dave Singson, good morning. Our distinguished speaker, Dr. Nick Poblador, our panelists, Joey Bermudez, Cliff EALA, Alma JIMENEZ, Professor Dindo MANHIT, and fellow members of MAP, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, everyone. On behalf of the MAP Human and Management Development Committee, which I chair, and the MAP ESG Committee chaired by Popoy del Rosario, I would like to welcome all of you to this MAP CEO Academy panel discussion on the new age of capitalism in the Philippines, part 2. Part 1 of this webinar was held on March 16 last year, which enlightened the participants on the implications of capitalism on strategies, corporate governance, and the common good of all stakeholders. Today's part 2 is in line with the MAP 2022 theme of Push for Change towards a better future for all, particularly on the main thrust of shared prosperity and sustainability. Through this panel discussion, MAP pushes for actions that will strengthen business commitment to environmental sustainability, social justice, good governance, and stakeholders' interests. That means employees, customers, suppliers, communities, and shareholders. Indeed, we should learn a lot from Professor Poblador. In fact, the internet describes his book, if you will look at it, as an eclectic effort to integrate various concepts, theories, insights, and paradigms from the disciplines of microeconomics, organizational behavior, institutional economics, and strategic management into one coherent and understandable volume. The Inquirer, for one, also weighed in and described his book as indeed enlightening, saying that in this modern age, there are capitalists doing very well for themselves by being very good to others. This is the point of the new book, Strategy in the New Age of Capitalism, Collaborative and Inclusive Approach to Value Creation. The book does not dispute the importance of profit maximization as a prime motivator of business firms, but in line with social Darwinism, business firms that are highly profitable do have the greatest chances of survival. Professor POBLADOR goes further by arguing that adopting new strategies of generosity aligned with economic interests of non-owner stock shareholders can create value for customers through various ways. We should learn indeed from this webinar. And let me thank in this regard, before we start, Vic Magdarao and Ben Tihanki for putting this panel discussion together and for co-moderating today's session. Vic is the co-chair of the MAP CEO Academy of our committee, while Ben is the co-vice chair for social justice of the MAP ESG committee. Ben is also the co-vice chair of the MAP CEO Academy of our committee. I hope that we will be enlightened on this collaborative and inclusive approach to value creation, which our speaker summarized in his new book. I encourage you to get a copy of the book at the MAP Secretariat, through the MAP Secretariat, and note that the limited copies will be distributed on a first-come, first-served basis. Thank you for joining this panel discussion, for attending this webinar, and welcome. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning.
Thank you very much, Attorney Rico. And before we formally start, just some reminders for our panel discussion proper. As participants for this panel discussion, your audio and video are automatically switched off. You may submit your questions through the Q&A box that you see on your screen. And with the assistance of our MAP Secretariat, I will read the questions on your behalf. You will only be able to see the program participant, but you will not be able to view the other attendees. In line with MAP policy and the interest of time, we will dispense with a lengthy introduction of speaker and the panelists. Their profiles will be flashed on screen. By the way, our speaker and all the panelists are members of MAP. I would like to remind our speaker that you have 20 minutes for your presentation. Just a short reminder for Professor Nick. Okay, for our presentation, for our formal presentation, may I call on our speaker, a management and economic thought leader and a retired professor of economics and management at the University of the Philippines. Please welcome Dr. NICETO, Nick POBLADOR.
Thank you. Thank you, Vic. And good morning, everyone, and welcome to this forum. I appreciate this opportunity to share with you my thoughts on some critical issues on survival strategies in today's volatile and uncertain world. Let me now share my screen with you for my presentation. The title of my presentation poses the hypothetical question.
Dr. Nick, we're not seeing the PowerPoint.
I beg your pardon?
We're not seeing the PowerPoint slide.
You are not seeing the PowerPoint? Oh.
Yeah. You have to click share content, then click on
Yeah.
the PowerPoint deck that you are about to share.
Okay, there you go. Yan. Wala pa rin.
Wala pa rin po.
Okay.
You want
Balik. Okay, balik. I click
share
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 screen.
content or share screen.
Okay, click it.
Then click on the PowerPoint deck that you are about to share. So
Yes,
open,
there you go. Just click it.
Point to the screen of your PowerPoint presentation.
Oh Lord, we're wasting time.
There you go.
there, you can see it now.
Okay. I see a pop in. Close other apps. Close.
You have to click on the PowerPoint slide.
There. Got it?
We can
Wala pa
still
rin?
see it, Dr. Ning. Wala pa rin po.
Sus Mario Jose. Oh,
Dr. Nick, would you like Joanna, in the interest of time, would you like Joanna to share this?
okay.
Slide
I will lose control, but we have to make that choice. Okay. Fine. So slide 1.
Joanna, please.
I will just slide 1. All right. The title of my presentation poses the hypothetical question: can companies achieve long-run sustainability in an unsustainable environment? My answer, plain and simple, is no, they can't. In order to survive, business organizations must operate in relatively stable and predictable business settings. And my presentation will now explore how businesses can survive in today's volatile and uncertain world. Slide 2, continue. The increasing volatility and unpredictability of the global economy is arising from the black swan events such as the COVID pandemic and the Ukraine war is prompting corporate managers the world over to initiate measures to enhance their chances of survival. Next, please. Many are adopting the ESG framework. Next, the ESG framework, which I'm sure most of you, if not all, are familiar with, describes 3 dimensions of sustainability. Environmental, in rapid succession, environmental, social, governance. Go back to environmental. Go back to first there. Environmental criteria consider how a company performs as a steward of nature. These criteria include the amount of carbon dioxide emitted into the atmosphere and chemical effluents dumped into the oceans. Next bullet. Social criteria examine how the firm manages its relationships with employees, suppliers, customers, and the communities where it operates. These measures deal with how a company relates with its stakeholders. Next bullet. Governance deals with a company's style of leadership, executive pay, corporate accountability, and shareholder rights. G has to do with organizational structure, norms, and processes. Next slide. These 3 sets of interrelated measures of corporate performance are discussed in their broad strategic context in my recently published book, Strategy in the New Age of Capitalism. In rapid succession, the next slide. This is my book, which was published by the University of the Philippines Press, from where copies may be ordered online. Next slide, please. This is okay. This is the overall theme of my book. The strategic goal of profit maximization or shareholder wealth maximization is best achieved by creating value for stakeholders rather than by extracting value from them. This can be done in a variety of ways. One, by creating value for consumers, by charging reasonably low prices and providing better quality products and services. In this way, the demand for the products and services of the firm increases, generating additional revenues, making the firm more profitable. By creating value for workers, by offering comfortable wages and providing good working conditions. I'd like to spend some time on workers. A recent report indicates that the Philippines is among the 10 worst countries in the world in the treatment of workers, which puts us in the same league as Bangladesh, Belarus, and Myanmar. It bears noting that human capital, which includes knowledge, skills, and capabilities, is today's most valuable resource. These resources are embedded in people. Truly, our workers are our most precious resource. Next slide, please. This is number 4, actually. By creating value for society through collaborative efforts to provide material benefits to the least endowed members of the community in a manner that also serves the financial interest, collectively known as inclusive business models. Inclusive business models, when implemented properly, enables the firm to acquire resources from the outside at lower than market costs. Next slide. In our concept of stakeholder strategy, the economic value created for stakeholders is treated as investments to enhance output over the long haul, and not as costs to be minimized in the short run. Next, please. Many corporations are investing in ESG compliant projects due to pressures from activist stakeholders. On page 58 of my book, I wrote, "Today, the role of business continues to evolve towards stakeholder capitalism. Businesses are responding to challenging times with greater compassion for their stakeholders and taking positive steps in addressing their economic interests, not as acts of altruism, but as means of achieving sustainability in meeting their long-run strategic objectives." We now look at ESG from a somewhat different perspective. I have a small number to identify my slide number. I'm missing it. So we now look at ESG from a totally different perspective, that of the sustainability of society and of the planet. The broader application of ESG framework is to achieve national and global sustainability, as opposed to sustainability of the firm, is a function of the state. But the state has, let's go back to the last bullet, but the state has become remiss in carrying out this function, and business should therefore assume this responsibility. Next. Firms can promote ESG for society by engaging with the various stakeholder activist groups in a collaborative effort to exert pressure on the state to promote environmental, meaning ecological, social, and governance sustainability for society, and consequently for its component institutions as well, including business organizations. We now look at a number of sources of social instability in our country. Apart from the COVID pandemic and the Ukraine war, there are currently 2 major sources of instability in Philippine society that pose a potential threat to its sustainability. One political and the other economic. We first look at the political. The recently held general elections has a potential impact on the current state of public sector governance in our country. Many see the outcome of the elections, the resurrection of a political regime that history has shown to have been responsible for the breakdown of most of our social and political institutions. This include, no, right, let's go back to the first bullet. Many see the outcome as a resurrection of a political regime that history has shown to have been responsible for the breakdown of most of our social political institutions. Among them are the judiciary, the military, law enforcement agencies, and regulatory agencies. All, in my thinking, all are in an advanced state of disrepair. In my thinking, only a handful remain spotless. The COA, Commission on Audit, is one of them. The Committee on Human Rights is another. Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, NEDA. All of these are professionally run government agencies. Political parties. Political parties are supposed to serve as platforms for meaningful political debates. In practice, they serve instead as launching pads for politicians to advance their personal interests and not those of their constituencies. Oh, mind you, I am citing the opinion of others. These are not my own opinions, although I do have strong opinions on these issues. Second bullet, rightly or wrongly, the recent election, according to a number of observers, was the result of a well-oiled campaign machinery that twisted the truth beyond recognition and aimed at gullible, impressionable voters. Candidates and political groups have been accused of deliberately spreading disinformation to mislead the electorate. Next. Many more ominously, it was seen as a political exercise where government agencies that have been captured by pressure groups, profit-seeking social media, including Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok, and self-seeking individuals are complicit. Next slide. By whatever lens one views the current political scenario, the emerging system of public sector governance is visibly chaotic, dysfunctional, unstable, and unsustainable. Next slide. Business, like all other institutions, are caught in the middle. Next bullet. If this process continues, we will end up as failed state like the Sudan, Afghanistan, Libya. Yeah. Business should therefore ally itself with other institutions in a common effort to save Philippine society from self-destruction. Next. Saving unsustainable economic system. Let's now look at the economic factor for instability. Can business rescue capitalism from imminent collapse? Next. In the introductory chapter of my book, I wrote, in the last 30 years, capitalistic societies have witnessed a dramatic increase in economic inequality, lack of economic opportunities, and the worsening of living conditions among large segments of societies. Such large-scale economic disenfranchisement in the face of phenomenal growth is unquestionably the greatest anomaly, among the greatest anomalies of capitalism. Next, please. The ever-widening gap in the economic fortunes of the very few, very rich individuals in society and the great majority of the people suffering abject poverty is unsustainable. Next, please. A picture of contrast. Like they say, a picture speaks louder than 1,000 words. This picture speaks volumes about the wide gap in the economic well-being between the very rich and the very poor in Philippine society. At the bottom, you will see, well, the foreground is the squalor and poverty that is the Baseco, the Baseco compound in Tondo. At the foreground are the high-rise office buildings and residential buildings that are a symbol of opulence enjoyed by the privileged class in our society. Next slide. There have been increasing calls from the business community itself for a more inclusive and a more compassionate form of capitalism. Very briefly, we have on August 19, 2019, the Business Roundtable adopted a statement of purpose of the corporation. With this proclamation, the BRT committed corporate America to creating value for all stakeholders. Next slide. Over a year later, the Philippine business groups, which includes the Management Association of the Philippines, signed a covenant for shared prosperity by which they upheld the universal issue of economic and social inequality and non-inclusivity by ensuring ethical wealth creation and the sharing of prosperity with others. Next slide. And then, of course, the World Economic Forum at its virtual meeting in 2021 made an impassioned appeal for stakeholder capitalism, an approach to business and economic policy making that looks beyond the interest of shareholders and toward the well-being of society. If we go back to, the previous slide, please. Slide 26, if you can see the number. Yes, the Covenant for Shared Prosperity clearly shows that business has a moral responsibility, ethical responsibility to share wealth with the less fortunate in the community. And then the next slide. The World Economic Forum, in its appeal for stakeholder capitalism, urges that businesses should go beyond the interest of shareholders. Beyond the interest of shareholders. In other words, businesses should be bound by a higher purpose, which implies that the ultimate goal of business is to create value for everybody. That is the ultimate goal of business, and not, as everybody has assumed, the maximization of shareholder wealth. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Let us digress for a minute on social responsibility of business. In my thinking, and this is my own opinion, all the sound and fury about stakeholder or inclusive capitalism is cloaked with the empty promise of corporate social responsibility, or CSR, interpreted by most as a form of largesse or altruism and a moral obligation of business to society. Next slide. In the introductory chapter of my book, in the epilogue of my book, I wrote in the initial paragraph my objection to this position. To summarize, it is widely held that business organizations have a moral responsibility to serve the needs of society. A view that is consistent with current thinking on corporate social responsibility. Next bullet. Business corporations are a form of social constructs that are something that do not exist in objective reality. As such, in my thinking again, business firms are ethically neutral. Third bullet. However, unlike institutions, people in organizations do have moral responsibilities. Humans have a sense of what is, go back to this previous slide, please, the bullet. Unlike institutions, people in organizations do have moral responsibilities. Humans have a sense of what is good, what is right. They behave according to their dictates of their conscience. To elaborate, in my thinking, the Villar Corporation has no moral responsibility to serve society. but its CEO, Manny Villar, has. What he does, of course, is entirely up to him. By the same token, the EALA Corporation has no moral responsibility to serve community, but Jaime Sobel, the EALA, has. Next bullet, please. Next slide. As a form of social institution, business organizations have no moral responsibility to serve the interests of others. Only the strategic responsibility to serve the material interest of its owners. This view is in keeping with the position attributed to Milton Friedman. If we accept this back to the first paragraph. There. If we accept this principle attributed to Friedman, then the following motto applies, which is, please, a good company is one that does good for itself. A good person is one who does good for others. Next slide. In my thinking, and this is an idea developed in my book, corporate initiatives that pass for corporate social responsibility have an underlying strategic agenda. The social benefits arising from commercial activities of business firms are the unintended external effects of their strategic and operational decisions on the material well-being of society, and not, as popularly construed, their intended purpose. Let me now conclude my presentation. I have tried to establish in my presentation that business organizations and other forms of social institutions can survive only in sustainable physical and social environments. If we accept this premise, then our conclusion follows, which is, it is therefore in the strategic interest of business to promote sustainable ecological, political, and economic social environments. Business must be socially involved. Thank you. Thank you for
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Nick. You just shared some very, very interesting and deep insight on our topic today. We will now proceed to the panel discussion proper. And I would just like to remind our panelists that you have, or rather you are given 5 minutes each for your respective opening statement. So may I call on our first panelist, the chair of Maybridge Finance and Leasing Incorporated, and who was also the MAP president in 2009. Please welcome Mr. Joey Bermudez. Joey?
Thank you, Vic. I only have 5 minutes, so I will go straight to the point. First, there is an implied premise in Dr. Nick's statement about how the strategic goal of profit for shareholder wealth maximization is best achieved. The unstated premise that an enterprise exists primarily to maximize shareholder wealth. I must say Dr. Nick is at risk of getting canceled by those who did not read with an unbiased mindset the entirety of his book. In case you didn't know yet, cancellation is no longer an algebraic operation. It is the bullying weapon of angry mobs who are offended by your contrary opinion. I'll take the same risk by saying that I agree with Dr. Nick. It is clear to me that in the long run, all the good things that enterprises do to make sure that their stakeholders are taken care of need not be motivated by a bleeding heart, but by a pragmatic realization that these actions do reinforce long-run profits. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. And Dr. Nick's perspective destroys it's a romantic but hazy concept that's been put forward by a lot of people in the past about a double bottom line. The alleged conflict between the profit motive and stakeholder interest exists only in the short run. In the long run, the investments made in stakeholder welfare bring more profits. The double bottom line, therefore, is an unnecessary tool for those who can see their way clear on the long-run journey of an enterprise. Unfortunately, the closets of enterprises are littered with the skeletons of CEOs who made bold investment decisions that hurt short-term profits. The typical CEO, unless he is the son of the owner, typically holds a 3-year contract. In that period, he needs to be perceived as adding value to the company. How is that perception shaped? Simple answer, share price. What influences the share price? Another simple answer, the verdict of analysts who compare
Yes.
performance with expectations. What metrics do they use? A simple answer once more. They start with financial statements that
Yes.
arbitrarily segment business performance by 12-month periods, artificially called the accounting year. Now, I can almost hear many of you saying in defense of the analysts, these guys, they're intelligent enough to appreciate the nuances of investment decisions and their effects on current performance. Surely they make allowances in their calculations for these things. Well, I will not stop you from thinking that way, but I can tell you that as someone who sat across the table from analysts countless of times, including those critical months immediately preceding the cataclysm of 2008, I am convinced that they don't particularly relish doing the painful homework of making these allowances in their calculations. My second takeaway relates to Dr. Nick's assertion that government has been remiss in its role to achieve national and global sustainability, and that business should therefore take over. Here is where I disagree with Dr. Nick. For as long as we're paying taxes to government, we should demand that it do its job. Economic exclusion is a result of actions taken by players in the value chain who have tremendous market power, but do not use this power to apportion value to all stakeholders, as Dr. Nick puts it, but actually take value from them. I would be naive to expect that these same players, just because they signed a roundtable document or covenant, will now take aggressive action to correct the lopsidedness of the value chain that they heretofore have been lording over. Government exists to ensure that human affairs are conducted in a manner that's fair and just to everyone. It is wrong to assign that role to private sector. My final takeaway concerns Dr. Nick's allusion to corporate social responsibility, or CSR. I don't know when CSR came to be known as anything other than a behavior. And that behavior is none other than what Dr. Nick calls the apportionment of value to all stakeholders. And I must add, in a very conscious fashion, greenwashing or astute corporate propaganda does not CSR make. CSR is embedded in the whole consciousness and DNA of an organization, not in its slogans or the sweet statements of its CEO. CSR is manifested in the overall behavior of an enterprise. In my view, an organization that feeds poor children or builds houses for Gawad Kalinga, but cheats its employees of their rightful wages and bleeds its suppliers dry has no right to talk about CSR. An organization may not be running any do good, look good, sound good program, but if it engages all its stakeholders in a fair, mutually reinforcing, and sustainable relationship, it can rightfully affix CSR to its personality. Thank you, Dr. Nick, for your insightful talk. I am glad that the MAP is running a forum like this that forces people to clearly articulate concepts that are otherwise loosely and mindlessly thrown about. I recall that at the height of the ruthless lockdowns, I was mortified by a Viber conversation that went on for a while, advocating a new capitalism without unequivocally explaining how it will differ from the kind of capitalism that it was supposed to replace. I feared then that people were playing with words and with fire, and that also had no place in an organization projecting itself as a thought leader that unclutters rather than confuses minds. I yield the floor, as I must have overrun my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joey. All your insights, I guess, tells us that we must organize another panel just to be able to give you more time to expound on your thoughts, which I think are very valuable. May I call on our second panelist, the president of Synerbyte Limited, who is also this year's chair of the MAP Next Gen Committee. Please welcome Mr. John Clifford, or Cliff EALA. Cliff?
Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Magandang umaga po sa inyo lahat, and thank you for joining us and for the opportunity to react. Thank you, Dr. Nick, for your presentation. So as panelists, we received an advanced copy of Nick's presentation. So in the interest of time, I summarized my reaction in 6 points. So the first point is, Dr. Nick talks about value, both for shareholders and stakeholders. Ever since the pin factory of Adam Smith, private enterprise's goal has been to maximize value. This goal creates certain excesses that must be addressed with regulation, be it self-regulation or regulation by the states. If the idea of value here and its measures are exclusively economic, we have an inherent conflict among stakeholders, consumers, employees, suppliers, and owners. Yes, sometimes profits for owners may align with bonuses for employees, but in most cases where economic value for one increases, it decreases for the other. For example, lower prices for suppliers mean higher margins for owners. In this tug of war, economic power determines the winner. Unfortunately, where there are winners, there too are losers. Left to its own devices, the untempered profit motive reinforces the concentration of economic power and the disparity between winners and losers. How do we break the vicious cycle? By regulation, self-regulation, which sparsely happens, or regulation by the state. My second point, under the same market model that governs Smith's pin factory, value is reduced to price. When this happens, we end up thinking only things that have a price are valuable, or worse, if it has no price, it has little or no value at all. Price leaves out what has value but is priceless in the real world. Unpaid work, natural resources, social capital, unpaid work at home like daily cleaning, cooking, caring, all necessary to get the economic actors productive, have value but aren't priced. Unpaid work of community volunteers, orphanages, elderly homes, medical missions, mentoring initiatives, feeding programs, and disaster response are undeniably valuable but aren't priced either. Natural resources and energy used as input to production aren't priced. Their extraction, distribution, and profit margins are, but not the resources themselves. Waste disposal into the environment isn't priced. Seemingly intangible social capital present when we describe a community or society as generous, willing to help, or with strong social support isn't priced either. Despite not showing up in GDP figures, social capital as trust and reciprocity resulting from social networks spurs economic activity. My third point, before I get red tagged, let me say clearly, the Marxist approach to fixing capitalism does not work. Abolition of private property and violence to achieve socioeconomic equity are tools that have failed throughout history. Unfortunately, some people label as Marxist any attempt to fix capitalism. This labeling is useless. We must move from extremist ideologies and find a more nuanced view of capitalism that works for all. My fourth point, here are 3 ideas to help recalibrate capitalism and reform it. First, bring in other measures of value. At the corporate level, integrate ESG measures into the KPIs of the people without, of course, removing importance from the economic gains. Second, at the macro level, complement GDP with non-economic measures of value. Examples are the Human Development Index of the UNDP, the World Happiness Index, the Social Progress Index. Another suggestion is to accept that private enterprise has moral and social obligations by virtue of it being an association of human beings. Yes, it is a mental construct devoid of obligations, but in the non-mental real world, a corporation is an association of human beings. And in the real world, being a manager doesn't strip you of your human rights. In like manner, it does not strip you of your human and therefore moral obligations either. Finally, strengthen public institutions so that they become pillars of good governance and public-private collaboration. My fifth point, many of these moral and social obligations are codified in varying intensities, from laws to shared statements, for instance, laws on minimum wage, conflict of interest, and environmental compliance, to statements of shared prosperity. ESG performance measures are an attempt to codify the obligations. And number 6, as Dr. Nick alluded, attempts to operate in a socially responsible manner is a requirement for long-term profit making. I read this as calibrated self-interest. It's calibrated for A, long-term survival, or B, to fulfill social responsibilities, or both. If the calibration is for mere survival, a business will allow any action that increases profit and long-term survival, even if it violates ESG tenets, as long as the violation goes unpunished. And that is where the danger is. On the other hand, if calibration is because of acceptance of the social responsibility, self-regulation will follow. In closing, do businesses have moral and social responsibilities towards society? In the real world, not in the constructs of the mind, yes, it surely does. Now, whether it fulfills that obligation is another story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cliff, for your keenly perceptive comments. May I call on our third panelist, the President and CEO of Health Solutions Corporation, who is also this year's chair of the MAP CEO Conference Committee and vice chair of the MAP Health Committee. Please welcome Ms. Alma Rita Jimenez. Alma?
Thank you, Vic. I will just also share my presentation. I hope you can see it in your screen now.
Yep, we can.
Yes, we can see it.
All right. Again, good morning, and it's a pleasure to jump into the fray. But that is probably what Dr. Nick POBLADOR intended, bringing all these ideas in the open for a healthy, even philosophical discussions. He captured the many facets of that makes strategy in the new age of in the age of new capitalism as a complex subject. And as we emerge from this pandemic, we have a sense that the business will no longer be business as usual. In fact, there is growing expectation to redefine the traditional concepts of what makes successful organization. The times call for us to rethink our actions so we can rise to the challenges of today and the future. And the manual of the old may no longer work. And the new playbook treats purpose and profitability as critical determinants of bottom line and trust, not just money as valuable equity. I agree with him. It's the tokenism of many programs, as Joey also pointed out, filed in the folder of corporate social responsibility that renders inclusive development disservice. When looking good for self-serving purposes becomes more important than doing good, when CSR becomes a PR tool rather than a way to give back to society, that altruism becomes dominant. I will agree that these business organizations probably think they have no moral obligation to serve the interest of others unless it is profitable for them. But how far will that go in the world of changing social expectations? Market patronage can be taken away when the public perceive insincerity. In this respect, serving greater good makes business sense. The world's big chunk of wealth is in the hands of not even 2% of the population, and the rest languish in poverty and inequality. The irony, of course, is that many businesses are responsible for the use of resources that tax the environment and the ecosystem. But everyone is bearing the brunt of this action. And this is probably where I would offer a little bit of difference in opinion from the construct. Organizations are defined as two or more people coming together to achieve objectives. Without people, there is no organization. Actions are taken based on the direction set by its leaders, making the leadership in the organization so fused that the boundaries are almost non-existent, most especially if the ones who lead are also the owners. We expect them and those they engage to lead to serve their material interest. But I hope that there's also a conscious effort to balance this with the interest of other stakeholders. Many studies already show that social missions can no longer be viewed as extraneous from the usual measurements of organizational performance, notably corporate growth and profitability goals. There is pressure, even obligation for organizations to serve greater good. Come to think of it, why should survival and sustainability and the moral and ethical obligation to do what is right be mutually exclusive? Why can't they coexist? In my opinion, the ideal is when there is congruence between doing what is right and being rewarded with customer patronage and profitability. Businesses analyze the dynamics of the environment as inputs to directions and actions, and that include the benefits to stakeholders. Social benefits are therefore not unintended external effects, but the result of strategic and operational decisions. And I think Dr. Nick said as much. When a patient, for example, is rushed to the emergency room of a hospital, he or she is given treatment immediately without considering if these services will be paid. Saving life is a moral responsibility and ethical consideration that takes precedence over profits. One may argue that organizations that keep doing that will eventually suffer losses, even closure. But that is where the exercise of leadership will come into play. They can craft the strategies that will allow them to continue to remain sustainable for the long term. But it's not an ideal world, as Cliff said. And we know that profit motives are more often the only goal because of personal motivation. When we dichotomize between what organizations do and what the individual does, then we risk that becoming an excuse to justify the lack of ethical responsibility. I think the times call for business to expand the meaning of capitalism and let capital be guided by ISM, inclusiveness, sustainability, and moral compass. Dov Seifman gave his take on how we do everything means everything. And he says the business of business can no longer just be business. Everything is now personal. The business of business is therefore society. Mission and margin, profit and principle, success and significance are now inextricably linked. So these thoughts for me aptly captures the new age of capitalism. We believe, as many business leaders do, that a company is more than a balance sheet. It is an expression of human bonds, a living entity that is sown and grown and whose harvest is lives and livelihood. So thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts today.
Thank you. Thank you, Alma, for sharing your sharp and penetrating viewpoints. May I call on, now I call on our last and fourth panelist, the CEO and Managing Director of Stratbase Group. Please welcome Professor Victor Andres Dindo, MANHIT.
Thank you, Vic.
Dindo.
Good morning to everyone. I agree with Dr. Nick. We are in this new age of capitalism, especially when I put in the context of the challenges that we are facing today, even with the new administration, even in a post-pandemic viewpoint. Economic challenges continue to be at the core of the Filipino people, the Filipino nation. And the previous administration has been seen as failing in this area. The perception that they are stepping down with high popularity rating, not on this specific issue. And when I see these numbers, it reminds me of a survey that we did at the start of the previous election season, whereby the Filipino people across geographic, across the
It looks like the internet connection of Dindo has slowed down. We'll wait a few minutes to let it catch up. This is, as you all know, this is a common occurrence in our with our internet connections. It's part of the challenge of doing things online as well. So while we double check Dindo's connection and how he will reconnect back to us.
Hello. So I'm trying to connect to my mobile phone now.
Okay. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Please,
my signal dropped again for the third time. But I was
right.
speaking of the challenge of the public to the government could also reflect to an opportunity for the private sector to create those jobs. Because we have seen how majority of Filipinos, 8 out of 10 Filipinos, look at this opportunity as very important. And that is basically at the core of the book of Dr. Nick. I take note of that, and I cannot really follow the slide now, so I hope.
Dindo?
Yeah, sorry. Am I still connected?
Yes,
yeah.
You are connected. The
Thank
slide
you
is
for
the today as the role of business continues. That's the slide.
Yes, that is quite positive, really, when I see this presentation of Dr. Nick, how important the role of business in this new era of capitalism, given the demand, really, of the public, not only to government, but to key players in Philippine society. And when you look at my next slide, I remember hosting in our institute exactly a year. We decided to do it a year after the pandemic, March 2021, with key business leaders representing different business associations, where we basically raised the issue of the private sector is key to achieving sustainable and inclusive economic growth. And I brought about 8 points, which I felt when I see the presentation of Dr. Nick, I say, I'm one with him. And it's something that I believe we need to push on, maybe on my part, as a public governance advocate, as a political economic analyst. So, because as we look into this, and moving to my next slide, I saw that strategy of generosity as very important. When I look at stakeholder capitalism, I raised this issue the past 2 years during the pandemic. What we need is not a whole of government, but really a whole of society, whereby different sectors, key sectors, government, business and private sector, and even civil society can work together. And maybe we can all create a more productive, a sustained growth that is driven by investment, not only simply by consumption, but one that in the strategy of generosity can really build a more consumption investment driven growth for the Philippines. In my next slide, I wanted to share also a week ago, exactly a week ago last Friday, I spoke of the need to drive investments as a way forward. And part of this investment as a way forward is the idea that as we encourage market-friendly policies, we need to do our part in the private sector. We need to ensure, as good citizens, as part of this broader stakeholders, Philippine society, we can really help drive investment that will address the basic concerns of majority of our people. 77% of them identify themselves as poor. And this is where the private sector can play a role. Create those jobs that will provide good wages and uplift their lives. Again, thank you for this opportunity. Sorry for this probably with connection.
Thank you very much, Dindo, for your brilliant and enlightened thoughts. At this point, I would like to call on the co-chair for social justice of the MAP ESG committee, who is also professor of the De La Salle University. He will serve as our panel discussion and Q&A moderator. Please welcome Dr. Ben Tihanki. Ben? Okay, but before you go on with your panel discussion, Prof. Ben, may I request for a short photo op with our speakers and panelists? So may I request Dr. Nick, Joey, Cliff, Alma, Dindo, Ben, and Attorney Rico to please open your videos. And can I also request President Babes, if you're still around, can you also open your video, please, so we can include you in the photo op. Okay, back to you, Arnold, for your photo op.
Professor Dindo, please open your video.
Yes, trying to in my mobile phone. Sorry. Wait.
So we're waiting for
Dindo.
Dindo to switch on the camera.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you
On my
go.
phone.
There you are.
There you go. There you go.
Yes. Thank you for waiting.
Okay, please smile.
It's good to see you.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. One more time, please smile. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, for the panel discussion and Q&A, please take it away, Dr. Ben. You're muted.
Dr. Ben, where are you?
You're muted. Muted, but no. And you're still muted. There you go. Oh, wala pa rin. You're still muted. Oh, still muted. Still muted. There, I think, okay now. Try, can you speak? Test. Can you try? Wala pa rin. We still cannot hear you. Okay, while we're waiting for Ben to reconnect and get his audio working, the nice thing about the online webinars is we can all have a copy of what we are about to say. So let me, let me throw into the panel, and Dr. Nick as well. Actually, this is Ben's first question. And Ben, I hope you don't mind. I'll throw in the question and then you can just jump in when you have fixed the audio problem. So the question is, okay, oh, Ben is back. Before I do that, connecting to audio. Okay. Ben, waiting for audio. Oops. So Ben, let me ask the first question, and then you can chime in after all their responses. So the question is this, to all our panelists: do you agree with Dr. Nick that in the last 30 years, capitalistic societies have witnessed a dramatic increase in economic inequality, lack of economic opportunities, and worsening living conditions among large segments of societies? Such large-scale economic disenfranchisement in the face of phenomenal growth is unquestionably among the greatest anomalies of capitalism. Why or why not? Anyone can just jump in.
I can start.
Okay.
We have tracked through the years, this challenge of, we call it challenge of inequality in Philippine society. But of course, you tend to compare it with the rise also of wealth for a certain sector. But me, I don't see it as one blaming one over the other. I still view it's more of the political system. What we have had in Philippine society is a reality that as we liberalized the economic side, we have not liberalized the political system. It has concentrated power in a few, which actually drives more inequality, but they hide behind their populist nature. So I feel that it's a good opportunity for the private sector to position itself as a solution, as a partner to addressing inequality. Because you have the capacity to create, as I've said earlier, the jobs and improve the lives of these people. Let's not get drawn into, usually even colleagues in the economics profession likes to point out to that area. But we have to look at the role of private sector. You have played an important role. We have played an important role. Not only with CSR, but the mere fact we create jobs through those investments. We just need to ensure that the private sector respects basic things with workers and sees themselves as part of stakeholders of Philippine society. That's why I value really this book, Dr. POBLADOR, that we need to push this and be at a learning source tool for everyone.
Great, thank you, Dindo. Comments? Joey, you were very passionate earlier. Any reaction?
I agree.
And I like that passion, by the way.
Thank you. I agree with that observation. I agree with Dr. Nick's term, the anomalies of capitalism. And we can, of course, demand information and data to back up that assertion, but all that one has to do is walk out of his door today and he will see proof of this assertion. And I think we have overblamed certain things for this problem. And one is corruption, for example. But what many people don't acknowledge is that we have a lot of systems problems. And if we can fix the systems issues, then we can address our problem of the wide inequality between rich and poor. The other thing is there is so much regulatory forbearance which goes unnoticed and uncriticized. And I think regulators have been getting a free pass for the longest time. So I think we ought to be looking at these two things which we have not paid enough attention to in trying to look for a solution.
Okay, thank you. Let me just check Ben. Ben, are you back? Are you in?
Vic, may I say something about this issue?
Sure. Please, Dr. Nick, yes.
Anyway,
go ahead.
Well, my book cites data that shows that over the past several decades, the gap between the very, very rich and the very, very poor has been widening through the years. Most recently, SWS has found that more Filipinos now consider themselves as poor than they did previously. The pandemic, for example, has benefited the very, very rich more than it has the very, very poor. So the gap is continually widening. And I think that this situation is unsustainable. Something must be done to promote more equality and access to economic opportunities. And I think one way of doing this is through education, because through education, we provide the least employable people in our society with the tools by which they can earn a decent living, because knowledge is today's most important resource. So
okay, thank you. Yeah, Here's I guess, a question and comment from one of our participants, and I think it's related. So I will throw this question to both Alma and Cliff. You can react to it, first, and then we can get other reactions from the other panelists. And here's what she says: a concern I want to raise is, what is the purpose and direction of the forum? Yes, your point and views are very informative. However, how will the business sector act in relation to what government and other factors are gravely affecting the businesses? Nasaan po ang assertion at voice ng business sector to have audience and action with government? I guess that's a very, really, in the face kind of question, but I think it's very, very relevant. Alma or Cliff?
So I don't know if I should answer first for Cliff, but
Go ahead, Alma. Go ahead.
but let me go ahead. But first, Vic, I was about to comment a while ago that in that question that you had prior to this one that you threw, because you throw Cliff and I the harder question, but it's so unfair. But let me just say that. In a way, the government is also like an organization, and the source of the revenue is taxes. And that makes us no different as business organizations that would have certain responsibilities to society. So the way we would react or even do service for our constituents is the measure of our success also as organizations. So in that respect, we cannot dichotomize between what business should do and what government should do. We are all organizations that are supposed to contribute something to the society. And on the aspect of looking at that in a general sense, but if you look at the microcosm of the society, each of those units will have to do something to make sure that the society works. I think there's someone in the panel who said something about we should look at this as a whole of society effort and not just put the onus on either public or private business to do it. But the reality of the matter also is that most of the government policies are always influenced by those who have the power to make to lobby for things that will benefit their organizations or their industries. And that is what makes the inequality come in, because others will not have that voice in the government. But the big corporations will have that voice because they are responsible for contributing a lot of revenues. The question is, are they using that voice to make sure that it is? And if they are not using that voice, how should their collective effort count in the society so that people will look to them also for results and for responsibility? So we just cannot say that well, their goal is actually to maximize profit or to be good to the society. It is expected of them to do that because they have the resources to do that. We cannot expect smaller organizations, for example, or even individuals to have the kind of voice that big business would have. And in that respect, the onus is really on them to be our voice in the society.
Right. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Alma. Cliff?
The question of what the purpose of the forum is, in my view, is to raise the awareness about the problems that are going on, particularly the way capitalism has been overtaking the way economies and countries are being managed. Because we were educated in the liberal philosophy of capitalism ever since the time of Adam Smith, we have embraced the fact that, and because there has been progress by following that framework, we have all embraced the fact that capitalism is good. The danger there is to forget that there are other ills that are going on. And it stems from the concept of what value is. Obviously, if you talk to financial analysts, it's always going to be financial value. But that's where the problem lies. So we need to raise the fact that there is a problem with the way capitalism is our guiding light in the way we run businesses. On the other hand, it cannot be left alone to the private sector. So I disagree with an absolute laissez-faire approach of running business, because we already see what's happening. This is what got us here. So unless we recalibrate that laissez-faire, profit motive, exclusive self-interest and greed, unless we recalibrate that to understand what really value is, then we won't be able to fix this. So where does the government come in? The government does play a strategic role, because there are problems in society that cannot be fixed if we do not work together. For instance, pollution of Pasig River. It cannot be fixed on an individual company basis, because if company A tries to fix it on its own and company B does not do its own part, then the market punishes company A. So it's counterproductive. In that sense, you need government to get involved. The second thing is government has to bring in the strategic leadership so that the areas of development that will benefit society as a whole, they are able to set the direction for the participation of private enterprise. This happens in transportation, this happens in communication, education. If all the government waits for is unsolicited bids, then it will not see the vested interests that are limited to certain parties. So in that sense, I'm saying that government has to have a little bit more brain power to be able to decide what are the strategic directions that we should push, so that development of certain sectors of certain and solutions to address certain problems are provided in a way that private enterprise can come in and work within that framework. And again, problems of slow internet in the Philippines. Why do we have more roads than a mass transport system? Why is our education system like this? So I think you can't just leave that alone to private enterprise. There has to be some strategic direction set, some incentive set, so that specific sectors are developed and specific solutions to address these problems are developed.
Right, good, okay, thank you. Before we proceed, let me just double check again with Dr. Ben. Ben, are you back? Do you have your audio on? Ben? Dr. Ben Tihanki? I think he still has technical issues. Thank you for those comments. And I will give Dr. Nick, Joey, and Dindo enough time, also time to respond to that. But let me just throw in another issue around here. You know, we all talk about big business and financial analysts, but we all know that 80% or 90% of businesses in the Philippines are small SMEs. I mean, what is their role here? If you can just include that kind of question in the broader topic that we're talking about now. Anyone can just, you know, if who wants to take on that.
I think same as any big business, we have to help them understand the importance that it's not about profit also, but also looking at themselves, playing maybe their little role in their small communities or small market, but still making sure that they respect workers' rights, they respect the environment, especially in some extractive industries. It's the small enterprises that really affects more than the big players in the extractive industry. So it's something that will cut across no matter how big your enterprise or your corporation is. But core to that is maybe it's time for us to realize that there is a role for business as capitalists, and that is helping make society more inclusive like the Philippines, because at the end of the day, as we make it more inclusive, the market grows and business grows with it.
Dick?
Yes, go ahead, sir. Dr. Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree that the majority of businesses in this country are small and medium enterprises. Now, how can small and medium enterprises slug it out with big corporations in Makati? In my thinking, first, there is need for small businesses to work together to to form what I call in my book an extended value network, with one firm serving as a platform, right, to interconnect everybody else, so that this huge network will be an effective value creator, perhaps even more effective than big corporations. For one thing, current technologies, knowledge technology, artificial intelligence, all of these are accessible not only to the big corporations, but to small corporations, small businesses as well. So if small businesses can find a way to bring their complementary insights, skills, and knowledge together into a huge value network, they can not only thrive, they can survive, and they can be profitable. So
okay, thank you.
There is a role for small business in this country.
Right. Thank you.
Excuse me, Vic.
Yes, go ahead. I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, my apologies to everyone. My audio threw a curve on me. I was following the very interesting discussions, and I must say I have not been present in a more incisive discussion on this issue. So I do thank Dr. Nick and all the panelists. One of the questions that I was thinking about is, how do we concretize this in a boardroom situation? Especially, I always hear the use of the term "in the long term" or "the long haul." But as pointed out by Joey, there are also analysts and accounting professionals who measure financial success in quarters and in years. And of course, the board terms are also defined in years. So in concrete terms, do you have some ideas on how we can bring all of these ideas together in an actual board discussion, let's say on a strategic move, let's say to expand to a foreign market or to shut down a plant? How do these all come together in your view? May I hear from our panelists?
At the board level, I think, I guess before we're businessmen, we have to be decent human beings, right? So, and there are certain laws that are already in place that have, as I mentioned earlier, they codify these obligations we have as human beings. Whether they're laws on minimum wage, they're laws on conflict of interest, they're laws on compliance with environmental rules. So you need to start there, right? You need to start. You can't just even if you have a concentration of economic power like large corporations, you can't just fire employees or not give them the right wages, or you cannot produce products that knowingly are pose health hazards to people, and substandard products.
So Cliff, if I may follow up. So in a board discussion, does that mean that the compliance officer has to be very alert to bring to the board's attention right away if there is a possible compliance issue, so that this will not be transgressed? Is that your point?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So the thing is, the problem, and again, as a businessman, I understand the profit motive. I followed the money all my 30 years of my working life. However, if that overtakes every other consideration, then it will just create a vicious cycle. So it has to start not only with the compliance officer, the chairman, the representatives of the owners, the other directors have to understand that, yes, we have to pursue profit, but that's not the only reason we're here. People may disagree with that, but that's my view.
So you're not just arguing for a compliance perspective, no, you're also arguing for a higher purpose for the firm.
Yes, self-regulation, incorporation of ESG metrics into the KPIs of the people. Now, I'm not saying that the ESG measures should be disjointed from economic measures. A very simple example: when a bank moves from paper billing to paperless billing, there is a cost benefit to the bank, but there is also an improvement in the carbon emissions. There's also improvement in productivity. Another example, if the bank decides to create a loan portfolio for transition financing from, let's say, coal to renewable energy, because you can't just jump that in one day.
Yes.
Create a transition financing program, that may not be as profitable as just pushing a coal portfolio. But there are other considerations to this. Like and it has to start with the top. If the top says, no, I don't care about the environment, all I want is profits, then that you know where the company is going to go. It's going to violate every ESG tenet as long as it doesn't get caught in the name of survival. And that's where the problem is.
Yeah, so point taken. Now, I also want to hear from the other panelists, because the point that Dr. Nick makes is that if the board can be convinced that it is in their strategic interest in the long term to think of the environment, to think of the welfare of the employees, then actually these interests will converge. But the point I'm raising to the group is, what would be the definition of the long term? How can you now convince disagreeing members of the board that this expense, or what Dr. Nick calls an investment, will actually pay off in that long term? What would be an operational definition of long term, you think?
I think if we attack the current metrics that are being used to determine the perceived value of an enterprise, we must present an alternative. And that's a homework for business organizations. So we cannot give the analysts of today and the accountants of today, who I feel are so behind the curve every time there is a major upheaval that happens. We saw how much behind the curve S&P and Moody's and everybody was when the 2008 crisis happened. We saw how the accountants were behind the curve. We saw how the risk professionals were behind the curve. We ought to help them. And if we're saying that what they're doing is insufficient, we must present an alternative. Now, how can that alternative be presented, and how can it even be formulated? And
Yes.
This brings to the question earlier about what is the agenda of the business organizations. I think business organizations have to be a little more courageous than they are today. Today, what do business organizations do? They seek a common ground, and that common ground is getting smaller and smaller. So what happens? They issue 2-page position papers that are so semantically crafted that they are safe and that they do not fight and they do not offend anyone. I think it is time to enlarge that common ground, to start treading into the uncommon and resolving the issues that make them uncommon. Unless business organizations do that, they will also become irrelevant in the long run.
So Joey, the question is, will that not put the business in an advocacy role that maybe some of its shareholders may not be comfortable with?
Yes, definitely. Every day, businesses do advocacy. Every day, they make us believe that they're advocating for something. So what is wrong with advocating for the right thing?
So you're just suggesting that they be true to their purpose and to their word.
That is correct.
I believe Nick had a point to say. Nick, you have the floor.
Yeah, Vic. Ben, may I say a few
yes,
words
please,
about
Nick. You have the floor.
In a world that is in a continuous state of flux, I think it's not possible to set a time frame to define the long term, where the short term ends and where the long term begins and where the long term ends, because everything is a continuous state of flux. So I think the metrics, the ESG metrics, should not be targeted at definite quantitative targets, but rather they should the trade-off about all of this interrelated indices or measures should be established with the end goal of towards at the end of the line, profits or shareholder wealth will be maximized. So this requires a continuous redefinition of trade-offs among the different measures of corporate performance, right? And everybody here has to be involved.
Yeah, so Nick, you bring in the phrase "the end of the line," which of course begs the question where that end is. But I think what you're saying supports Joey's idea that there is an agenda, the business has an agenda, and therefore all of these decisions have to be put on the table, and the management has, and the board has the challenge of balancing all of this for the welfare of the company and all the stakeholders. Alma, I think you had something to share on this matter of concretizing how these elements can come together in a boardroom decision?
Yeah, I was about to say that we also have people in the business community, the board, will always look at the what they call this proof of life. That's the right term for that. So when you try and convince, for example, your board or craft the directions that the business will take, they will always look for something that will support those decisions. But the reality is, while we talk about individual companies doing this and that, there's really no conscious effort to document the effects of a concrete ESG program for companies. So what does it do to their bottom line? And that means that we also, I saw something in the chat box that says, there is a need to make sure that we also change the way we teach business in the schools. That we only teach profitability and revenue growth as the measures of good business performance, but we neglect to emphasize that it has to be in all fronts of performance. So there must be some concrete measures also, or expectations, changing expectations of the public about how a business would perform. And that means even in the side of the government, we talk about compliance officer as if it is something that must be regulated. I'd like to look at it on the other spectrum, which is how do we incentivize then good performance? Then we start by saying that it has to be in the form of customer patronage, because at the end of the day, the business community will always look at profitability. If it's not good, and the public says it's not and takes away the patronage, then there goes your profitability. So you have at some point to marry, or there should be congruence in doing good, because it serves both purpose. It gives you a meaning, it gives meaning to your existence in the society, but it also serves your business because you can be profitable in the long run. So I think it's changing also our construct from the traditional, getting out of our comfort zone and start measuring our performance by increasing the measures by which we say we are doing good in the business community.
Yeah, excellent idea, Alma. I think you're raising the point of doing really some in-depth research on whether all of these stakeholder initiatives really have positive outcomes, right? The recent research I've seen is that it's still an open question. There is no indication that Filipino consumers, for example, are really green sensitive or even mindful of what employees are being paid. So a lot of this is really risky on the part of business. But for those who think along certain lines, they see it as a principled decision, irrespective of the financial outcome, while we wait for that. I wanted to bring in Dindo to the discussion because I think...
Ben, I would just like to make one comment. And that's where you guys in the education sector should come in. You should start teaching the young people by what measure should we judge the performance of all of these businesses.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alma. And in fact, we've been doing that since 1999. The challenge we have, and which is the motivation for why academics are joining MIP, is we need to work together with the practitioners. Because when we teach these success indicators to students, they look at us funny and say, you're in another world. That's not how we do business. So that means we need to really make this a joint effort, or as Dindo says, a whole of society effort. Otherwise, it's like we're talking, we're negating each other's message. So it has very little impact. So I think when my students see this discussion, for example, it will have more weight in terms of what we're trying to teach them. Now, going back to my attempt to bring in Dindo, because Cliff was mentioning that a lot of these moral obligations are actually codified. In fact, they are in the Constitution. The Constitution is explicit that all economic entities shall contribute to the common good. It is explicit in the SEC Code of Corporate Governance that all companies shall be socially responsible in all its dealings. The challenge, though, is codification is sort of ahead of the moral development of business itself. There seems to be a lag there. And I think, Dindo, you might have some insight here on how the codified mandates of government and the practical behaviors of business, as we see it, can more or less align. Do you have some views on this, Dindo?
Yeah, thanks for that point, Ben. No? Of course, we know for a fact that the normal reaction is simply maybe mere compliance with this codified demand. But I think we're seeing, and I've seen it through years of working with the business sector, both medium and big enterprises, especially proof of concept is during the pandemic. 3 days after the lockdown, I was asked by different CEOs to sit with them, and we came up with this intervention that I think it reached 1.5 billion. The idea is that government might be too slow in helping the poorest of the poor in Mega Manila. And this led to a month after Task Force T3 and led to the vaccination program also. Not the Joey consumption led, but the one with the Riquerason and other conglomerates. They did not, this was at the height of their challenges, profit-wise also. But they were ready to play a role in society. And I hope this lesson this past 2 years, as we try to overcome this crisis, can be a good model, a good case to everyone, be it big or small. Of course, really challenging for smaller enterprises. But you have a role to play to your employees, you have a role to play to your customers, and it should be part of how business models ought to be followed, no? In terms of executing your objective of creating value for your investors, creating value for your whole company. Because there is really an important role. Even the mere hiring of people is an important role already. But following what is codified in law, like when you look at extractive industries, there's always commitment to bring your profit somewhere else, to involve your community before you even start business, or even in other industries. So it's something that should be minimum, and from there businesses should move and create real values that they can share internally from leadership, board leadership, down to employees as they engage with customers, as they engage with suppliers. And imagine what kind of society you create when you have that kind. And it addresses this, as I've said earlier, the generational inequality that is we are experiencing. Dr. Nick mentioned SWS. 77% said they're poor. Filipinos rate themselves as poor, and that's quite sad. And this is not the rating of government, but people feeling themselves poor, and that's a challenge.
Sorry, Ben, might be appropriate to just share this comment by rather from President Babe's Singson in the chat.
Go ahead.
He says, I think there is obvious agreement that public and private sector should really collaborate for nation building. Both should focus on the bottom 40% poor to address the widening economic gap. MAP's voice should be heard and must be strategic to ensure social justice and more compassion in society. I just wanted to throw that in the conversation because I think it's a very appropriate comment to share at the moment.
Thank you, Vic. Very well said, President Babes. I think, yes.
I had a comment
Cliff, go ahead, Cliff.
Yeah, what you said earlier about codification and then the businesses are delayed. So ideally, there should be some self-regulation, but there's none unless unless the owners of the company already believe that they should be doing good to society. If they don't, then you need regulations from the government. So now you have these laws in place, but we have weak institutions. We think BIR is strong in the Philippines, but you try evading taxes in the US, they'll hunt you down. Insider trading in the US, in the Philippines, it's an unspoken secret. People do this, but you try that in the US and the SEC will crucify you. So that's where strong institutions play its role. independent of personality politics, partisanship, where the institution can hold its ground, implement the laws regardless of whoever is in power. That's where the role of strong institutions should come in.
Yeah, thank you, Cliff. I think Dindo will agree with that. But we can also agree that building institutions is a generational project. You know, we're talking 15, 20 years. In the meantime, our people are starving. Climate change is knocking at our doors. But I'm a sociologist. I'm a believer in strong institutions, and I've been believing that for 40 years. But we have a concrete situation here that faces us, and this is something that boards face quarterly at the very minimum, and every decision they make will either push us closer to the social vision that Dindo is saying, or further impoverish our countrymen. So the question I wanted to pose to the others is that, because Dindo cited the pandemic situation, and I think that was an interesting social experiment, but in your view, how much of the courageous decisions of the businesses were because of the threat of pain, meaning that they were losing so much if they don't act, or how much of it was an awakening that indeed they are part of society and they must take a courageous step forward, as Joey suggests, to really lead in building our social vision? What is your view? Anyone would like to share?
Ben?
How much of that was fear? How much of that was courageous leadership? Dindo, would you like to share your
take? I
take
think
on that?
it was leadership, because there was really no fear. You're facing uncertainty. And suddenly, I mean, I got brought in to advise them. Then subsequent meetings, groups after groups. And I remember the decision to help in the procurement of vaccination even after the task force T3 of me. It was a joke after President Duterte announced early morning that he will vaccinate his military, his police, the private sector, bahala na kayo, wala akong pakialam sa inyo. And I got called for a breakfast meeting again and said, why don't we develop a fund to buy vaccines? And we worked with government. We worked actually with Ambassador Babe Romualdez to reach out to the US and go direct. So you see them, there's not a lot of fear. It's really taking care of their employees and their families. What's the great motivation there? This was after suffering so much already. So I think it's great leadership. We need to make as a core value of business leaders in our country.
So that might be a silver lining of the pandemic, that we saw what is possible with courageous business leadership, right, Dindo?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, Ben.
And perhaps because the World Bank data shows that even the employment in our country is not really producing the upliftment that we're looking for. A big portion of the employed remain poor, which means that it's not really just creation of jobs that we need, but it's the creation of more decent jobs and jobs that pay better. What are some of your views on how this can be achieved strategically to the advantage of the business, as well as uplifting the job quality in our country? Does anybody have a take on that?
May I?
Joey, please.
Yeah, I think if we start looking at things from the standpoint or from the perspective that Dr. Nick offered earlier, then it becomes a lot easier for business to do it with conviction. And in fact, harking back to your question earlier about whether what caused this initiative of the private companies within Dindo was fear or was it leadership? Personally, I hope it was fear. I hope it was the realization that what is happening today is proof that if we don't let our long-term goal of shareholder wealth maximization converge with what is happening in society today, then we're going to be kaput. We're going to disappear as well as corporations, because that is what will sustain and that is what will make initiatives like this regular and consistent. Otherwise, it will always be ad hoc.
So you're hoping it was a rude awakening, Joey?
Ben?
I'm hoping it was. I'm hoping against hope, though. I know.
Yeah,
Then-
I'm with you. I'm hoping.
Then-
Dr. Nick, please.
Yeah, I observed in my book and in my presentation that one of the big benefits that we realized from the pandemic is the realization among all that we're all in this together.
Mm.
If our ship of state sinks, we all sink. So we have all the reasons to work together collaboratively for a common good.
That's a tremendously important message. And I think that's what the Covenant for Shared Prosperity is trying to communicate.
Yes.
And that's why we're trying to clarify what really is our view of this matter of having a common goal of building society.
Yes.
I think since we're nearly in the last 10 minutes, what I'd like to do is ask, okay, I think we have a comment in the chat. Let's read this comment. This is from an anonymous attendee. It says, does the MAP have links with big companies here engaged in oil, petroleum, hoping an ease in the rise of diesel prices can be opted? MSMEs, I believe, like us, are trying to survive. Not to mention these trusts you want us to adopt, not just profit, raising and maintaining wages to employees is already a tall order. So our attendee is raising the fundamental question of economic survival, even as he's listening to our message that business has a larger role to play. Who would like to respond to that? Although I think he's very interested in oil prices, as we all are, I'm sure. These are the ones who feel they can ill afford to think of their social role. Earlier, we were talking more, as Alma said, of those who can afford. Those are the big ones, they have deeper pockets, and yet it still remains an issue for some of them whether they should do this. But we now have a question asker who's saying he's feeling the pain in the pocket. Alma, please.
Yeah. Well, no one is from the petroleum companies here, so I don't think we can answer whether we can lower the prices. But that I think highlights the problem of the micro and small enterprises. And I was really waiting for Joey to weigh in on this, especially since the fact that 99.51% of our enterprises belong to the MSMEs, but they are responsible for 62.66% of our employment. And so I think one of the things that big business can do is actually to make sure that they support the fundamentals of these MSMEs, but that's not happening. And Joey and I know this because we're working together in some MSMEs initiatives. And like Dr. Nick POBLADOR, Joey and I believe that collaboration among these groups is really essential so that they will have market power. But it's not also happening because it's not the way they were taught to think about business. The paradigm is always that you operate on your own, you profit on your own, but they have other concerns, no? And how do we bring them to the concerns that we are talking about? And this is something aspirational maybe in the future, but right now at this moment, their concern is survival. And maybe the question is not really to think in terms of the big goal of being beneficial to society, but let's try to do it small steps. Let's try to help first our micro enterprises because they belong to our tribe. And yet nothing is being done to make sure that we provide also ways by which we can give them safety nets. For example, I have yet to see big corporations helping the MSMEs, even by just paying them on time. But we're not even seeing that. So if we really want to have better acceptance of all of these constructs that we're talking about, then we have to make sure that we bring them up to the level where they can talk about this just as much as we do. And that begins by us also exercising that responsibility of making sure that we help in bringing them up to this point. And let's get them past the surviving stage, and let's get them into that stage where they can start thinking about all of these things.
Yeah, very well said, Alma. So I hope that the rude awakening that was experienced in the pandemic will be experienced also for the MSMEs, that all of us should help the MSMEs uplift themselves so that they can secure the future of their business and thereby also help secure our our society. I think before we wind up, I'd like to ask for 1 to 2 sentence final message from our panelists, and then we will leave Dr. Nick to have the final say. Then I'll turn the floor over to President Babes for some closing remarks. Who would like to give his or her final message? May I start with Joey?
Okay, thank you, Ben. 2 messages. Number 1, I think MSMEs should be left alone to do business. When people cry out to government that MSMEs need help, I get scared because what I might see after that is a Magna Carta for SMEs that regulates them, that makes it difficult for them to even organize and exist. Second, government must not be absent. It must fix the value chain. A lot will happen if the value chain is fixed, and that is the role of government. The problem is government is in the wrong places today. That is where they ought to be.
Thank you, Joey. Let's hear from Cliff.
From me?
From
Okay.
Cliff, we'll leave you for the last, Nick.
Oh, okay. Well, let me
Nick, we'll hear from Cliff first, and then we will leave you for the last, so you can have the last.
Okay.
One.
Akala ko
Cliff?
ako na.
I just think the idea of value has to be revisited, and not only the concept itself, but the way it's going to be measured within the context of both individual companies and society as a whole. They say that money can buy you happiness, and money can buy you happiness. I don't believe that. It can buy you happiness, but it does not always buy you happiness. Just look at so many millionaires who have been separated, or rich people who have committed suicide. So the concept of value has to be revisited, and certain measures that will incorporate a new understanding of what value is has to be incorporated into the KPIs of companies and into the economy as a whole.
Thank you, Cliff. This time we'll hear from Alma.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I think I will have to repeat the quote that I shared a while ago when I said that just like McKinsey, we believe, as many business leaders do, that a company is more than just the balance sheet and its expression of human bonds. At the end of the day, I think whether we talk about an organization or as an individual, we are in a constant search for meaning in our lives. And that decision, those actions that we take, they define our relevance in the marketplace.
Thank you, Alma. I'm not able to see Dindo in the screen.
Yeah.
Arnold, is Dindo still with us? All right. Perhaps Dindo got disconnected somehow. So I will give the floor back to our main provocator of insight, Dr. Nick Poblador, for his final word before I turn the floor over to our president. Nick, your final word.
For my final words, I would just want to make a quick reaction, quick response to the panelists' earlier response to my presentation. With Joey, for example, I agree with him completely that the apparent conflict between short-run strategies and the long-run goal of profit maximization can be or what is called short-termism, it can be reconciled one way or the other. We have to establish a trade-off between short-run objectives of maximizing revenue or returns and the long-run objective of maximizing shareholder wealth. And okay, in regard to Cliff's emphasis on value, I do agree with him that price has been the only index by which we measure value, which is unfortunate, because the true value of a product or a service is actually how it is evaluated by the ultimate consumer, or what is called reservation price. So clearly the use of price as the sole measure of value is unfortunate, because it really understates the economic value of a nation's output of goods and services. Alma's, with Alma, I agree with her in her observation that the boundary between the corporation as an institution and the individual members as human beings is rather blurred, especially when, in the case of, for example, family-owned corporations or corporations where there is a dominant ownership interest of one or two individuals, in which case the values of the individual and the objective of the corporation becomes rather fuzzy. And finally, with respect to Dindo, who started his reaction by referring to the country's economic objectives, he observed that the well-being of workers seem to be, or generating employment seems to be at the bottom of our preferences. In my thinking, it should be a primary goal of government to address the interest of workers. And this can be done by investing in human capital, because in today's world of business, human capital, especially knowledge, which is embedded in people, is the most important resource. So we should invest heavily in knowledge. So education, I think, is of primary importance in our national development program. Thank you.
Okay, spoken like a good teacher, Nick. Thank you for that plug for education. So I'd like to thank everyone, Dr. Nick and our panelists, for a truly informative and incisive exchange on this very complex but extremely important issue. I turn the floor back to Vic, whom I think will give the floor to our president for some concluding remarks. Vic?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Ben. And now I'd like to call on President Dave Singson for your reaction and comments as well.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you, Dr. Nick, for sharing your views and, of course, the views of the panelists here. Unfortunately, as I can see, there are only less than 10% of MAP members who are attending. So my suggestion, ladies and gentlemen, if lady and gentlemen, is if I can get top 5, not more than 5, that you want the whole MAP membership to hear from this discussion, can I have it, please, so that I can make that my main agenda for my initial inaugural speech for the MAP membership on July. You can please use me as your voice, because I'm very much with you in terms of making sure that the business sector behaves with a little bit more compassion, with a little bit more social justice imbued in its corporate code. And as all of you agree, however, we need both the public sector and the private sector to collaborate to make a proper or a better Philippines. And so again, my appeal, if somebody can put it together, I'll definitely make it part of whatever I will say when we turn over officially between Fred Pascual and myself. And by the way, Fred Pascual's focus in DTI will be on small and medium enterprise, bringing them into the mainstream of the marketplace. And so, Joey, your views are definitely going to be much appreciated if you can reach out directly to Fred. He is very open to suggestions at this time. He's trying to rebuild the DTI from where it is today to really have specific roadmaps for products per region. So again, thank you to everyone. And I really hope to get from either Ben, from Vic, or even from Dr. Rico, your suggested agenda that I can pick up. And I'd like to let the whole MAP membership hear your views. That has been very limited to less than 60 members in this forum. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
Thank you very much, President Bade, and thank you very much for the invitation for the panelists and Dr. Nick to share their ideas with you. And then you can use that as part of your messaging for your term as president of MAP. And also thank you for giving us a preview of what your term will look like by giving us those comments as well. So again, thank you very much. And I also would like to thank our main speaker, Dr. Nick, and our panelists, Joey, Cliff, Alma, and Dindo, for a very, very substantive conversation. And obviously, all of those ideas were kind of pulled out from you by with the skill of Dr. Ben T. Hankey, our co-moderator. So thank you very much. And of course, thank you to Attorney Rico, who is our chairman for this committee. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and healthy. This is the MAP CEO panel discussion, and we now call it adjourned. Thank you, and good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Pilipinas.